I burst into my brother's room and blurted out, "Charlie, you're gonna be my boyfriend!" He said I was crazy. We were brothers and sisters, but I immediately calmed him down. And I told him that all 11 years at school, I was considered a loser. But it was the last years of my studies, and I decided to prove that I was a cool girl and to win the love of the best guy in school, Dan. How many times have I tried to get Dan's attention? But all my attempts have failed. Everyone just laughed at me and said that Dan wouldn't fall for a nerd. And yesterday, I thought I saw Dan wink at me at school in the locker room. I realized here it was, my chance to change everything. But after hearing me out, my brother Charlie flatly refused to play my boyfriend. Oh, right? Then I said that if he did not help, I would tell our parents that I saw him doing something forbidden with the guys at the party. Charlie panicked and said he was just messing around. And I replied that if our parents found out, they would probably send him to a clinic for treatment. Then he would not have a sports career. He added that he did not expect such a vile blackmail from me. After that, Charlie sighed and asked what to do. The plan was this: I would catch Pretty Dan after school, and when we left school, Charlie would treat me with a bouquet. Dan would get jealous and finally fall in love with me, a trick I read about from a pickup coach. We don't look like brothers and sisters. You are a blue-eyed blonde, and I am a brunette with brown eyes. Charlie nodded curtly. After school, everything went as it should. I found Dan, and when we left school, Charlie was waiting for me with a gorgeous bouquet. I hugged my brother, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw how much Dan didn't like it. He was definitely jealous. It worked. Suddenly, a blonde girl came up to us, and Dan quickly left with her. What was that just now? Was she his girlfriend? I immediately told Charlie to follow them. Charlie said that he didn't like the guy and that he would go after him, just so I wouldn't be in any danger. Come on, you don't know him at all. We watched Dan and his blonde girl carefully, and at one point, they went into the park. The path gradually narrowed. We had to fall far behind to avoid being noticed. And Charlie was always stopping and showing me some leaves. After another leaf, I suddenly realized that I didn't see Dan. Damn, did we miss them? It's all because of you, Charlie. I was frantically trying to figure out how to find them when I suddenly saw a Ferris wheel nearby. Bingo! From this height, we'll find Dan quickly. The queue for the wheel was long and I was nervous. Charlie tried to calm me down and even brought me cotton candy. How did he know I loved it? Then it was our turn, and the controller offered to take binoculars. Of course, give me. It will be very useful. We started going up, and I looked through the binoculars for Dan, and Charlie kept saying it was a stupid idea. And then I finally saw Dan on one of the benches. He was having a nice chat with a blonde. We just need to go down there and eavesdrop on their conversation, but the wheel was moving so slowly. Suddenly, we rocked, and for a second, Charlie and I were so close that our lips almost touched. And for the first time, I saw his deep blue eyes so close. Wow. But I immediately pulled away from him. There was an awkward silence in the air. When we finally got down, I noticed that Charlie looked sad. I pretended that nothing had happened and said that we needed to get to Dan faster. I hoped he was still sitting on that bench. We made our way to them and crouched in the bushes behind them, where we could hear the conversation clearly. At first, they were talking about all sorts of nonsense, but suddenly my name was mentioned in the conversation. I was glad that Dan was thinking of me. But he only laughed at this masquerade with flowers. He didn't believe Charlie was my boyfriend. I was annoyed that my plan had failed. And then Charlie began to pull me aside. Charlie, what's this for? Looking down, I noticed a snake near my leg. Charlie caught himself and threw it back with a branch, but Dan had already got up from the bench and was walking towards the bushes. He heard my cry. Charlie suddenly howled like a huge dog. Dan immediately recoiled, and he and the blonde hurried away. Thank you, Charlie. As soon as we got home, I locked myself in my room and spent half the night coming up with a new plan. But I kept thinking about the moment on the wheel. I couldn't think of anything but Charlie's deep blue eyes. We almost kissed. And then I got an idea. We could kiss in front of Dan. A fake kiss, of course. I went out to breakfast and, as if nothing had happened, told Charlie about it. He almost choked and refused to participate. But I immediately reminded him that there was something I could tell our parents. Charlie and I arrived at school earlier and were standing in the school parking lot on purpose. I was worried and kept looking over my shoulder to make sure I didn't miss Dan. And now, at last, he arrived. I wrapped my arms around Charlie's neck and wanted to turn my back on Dan so he wouldn't notice our fake kiss. But Charlie suddenly kissed me for real. Charlie, what are you doing? I tried to pull away, and then I noticed over my shoulder that Dan was walking toward me. Ignoring Charlie and her kiss, Dan took my hand and invited me to the party. Oh my god! Did it really work? And then Charlie suddenly said that I wasn't going anywhere. No, I said. I'm coming to this party! Then Dan and Charlie exchanged an unfriendly look, after which Dan nodded and left. I immediately snapped at Charlie. What are you doing? Why did you really kiss me? Charlie deadpanned that he just wanted to help. Then make things realistic. Then I thanked Charlie coldly and told him that his help was no longer needed. I turned around and went home. The party was already today, and I needed a cool look. As I picked up my dresses, I banished the thought that my first kiss in life had happened to my brother. And then Charlie came into the room. He was about to say something, but when he saw me, he stopped in mid-sentence, and then he said with a delight that I was stunning. I felt myself blush, turned away, and firmly stated that I was in a hurry, and quickly left. I was looking forward to a great evening with Dan, but he immediately disappeared somewhere, and I was left alone. Everyone was having fun, and I was very lonely. I thought Charlie would support me now, but I stopped myself. At that moment, Dan came up and said that he had a surprise. Before I could answer, Dan pulled me along. Everyone parted, and then I was standing in the center of the room. Dan asked me to close my eyes, and suddenly something nasty was poured on my head. I looked up and there was a bucket of slop hanging from the ceiling. Everyone burst out laughing. Dan, why are you doing this? At that moment, he threw a glass of juice at me and said that no one liked such crazy nerds, much less him. Then Dan added that I was trying to make him jealous by kissing my brother. He was onto us from the start. Boo! The cheerleaders immediately boomed. You're just a jerk and she's the best girl on earth. I heard a familiar voice. Charlie? But what was he doing here? Charlie said quietly that he didn't like Dan right away. He was worried and decided to check on me. I pushed everyone aside and ran out into the street, with Charlie running after me. I was choking on tears. I embarrassed myself in front of the whole school. Charlie tried to calm me down and told me that Dan wasn't just worthy of me. Through my tears, I asked, and who is worthy, Dan? And then Charlie came right up to me and told me that he had been in love with me since childhood and no longer wanted to hide his feelings. That's why he took up sports, to try to drown out his feelings. It helped for a long time, but the incident on the Ferris wheel reminded him of everything. I couldn't believe it. Charlie, are you sick? You're my brother. I staggered away from him and ran away. My mind was all mixed up. He was my brother. We needed to stay away from each other. I didn't want to see Charlie, and I didn't want to be around him. And then I remembered about something forbidden. I ran home. My parents were shocked by my appearance and began to ask what happened. But I blurted out everything to Dad about the party where Charlie was using some illicit drug. I said that he needed urgent treatment and that they should take him to the clinic. Dad was furious, and at that moment, Charlie ran home, out of breath. Dad told me to go to my room and ordered Charlie to sit down at the table. I was hurt and ashamed. It seemed like I'd made a terrible mistake. I couldn't sleep all night. One minute, I wanted to go into Charlie's room and hug him. The next, I wanted him out of my life. The next morning, I woke up to a loud slam of the door. I ran to the window. Charlie was walking to the bus stop with his bag. I looked at him for the last time, and suddenly something inside me seemed to shrink. These feelings are terrible, but I can't lose him. I rushed down to my parents and blurted out that Charlie and I were in love. There was a pause. I thought they would begin to say that I was crazy and also lock me up in some kind of an asylum. But Dad didn't just say anything. And then suddenly, he hugged me and said that he and my mom had guessed that this could happen. What are you talking about? And then Dad said that they didn't want to talk about it, but it looked like it was time now. My parents adopted me when I was a year old. It turned out that Charlie knew everything, but they asked him not to tell me about it. I was shocked. It turned out that all this time, Charlie was not my brother. But then it dawned on me that this meant that Charlie and I could be together after all. Hooray! I immediately ran out of the house. My parents shouted after me that I would not make it. The bus was about to leave, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was happy. While I was chasing that vile Dan, my true love was so close. A bus stop was around the corner, and I saw Charlie on the bus. I started to scream, and then Charlie noticed me. He ran out of the bus as fast as he could, and I immediately threw my arms around his neck. We're not siblings. I know, he didn't want to tell you, so as not to hurt you. Charlie gave me a big hug, but the bus gave the signal to leave. Charlie opened his arms. Please don't go away. After all, now we will be together. Despite my tears, Charlie got on the bus. I was amazed. Why was he leaving? But Charlie took his bag from the salon and calmly walked back to me. Actually, I was on my way to the workout, but if this is the case, I can skip one. How? I thought you were going to the clinic. Charlie laughed and said that he settled everything with his father. He gently took my hand and suggested that we take a walk in the park. And I said I wouldn't mind another ride on the Ferris wheel. I quickly locked myself in my room to send a text message to my beloved Carlos. In an hour, I would run to him from this orphanage. Carlos wrote that he would meet me at the border with Mexico, but he would have to take a lot of risks and the cops could catch him at any moment. I was hastily packing my suitcase when the nanny came into the room. "You were adopted," she said solemnly. "Get ready. We're going to visit your new family right now." 5 minutes later, we went out into the orphanage's yard, and I deliberately hesitated at the car, and when the nanny got behind the wheel, I ran as fast as I could from the territory. "Carlos, my love, wait for me." Oops, there were angry guards around the corner. They instantly pinned me down and dragged me back to the car. Once I was inside, the nanny locked the doors and grinned slyly. "Do what you want. I'll run away anyway," I thought. All the way, the nanny didn't stop talking. She kept saying how lucky I was because such nasty girls rarely found a home. And that my new parents were good people, albeit with their own characteristics. What does that mean? The nanny didn't have time to answer me. We arrived. On the threshold of a huge house stood 5 guys. Was I adopted into the army? The tallest of them opened the car door for me, and the other, a fit jock, took things out of the trunk. The others just stood there and stared at me. The nanny immediately left and I was left alone among this bunch of guys. We met. Tallville and Jock Pete turned out to be a sweet couple, and at the same time, my new parents. And the other 3 guys were their adopted children. Wow. I needed to get out of this madhouse. I casually tried to take my bag from Dad Pete, but he said he would take my things to my room. Phil asked for my passport and added that they kept all the family's documents in a safe. I didn't want to give my passport. How could I cross the border without it? But Dad Phil looked very stern, and I didn't want to argue. "I'm sorry, Carlos. I didn't think I could escape today." Then lunch was waiting for me. The kitchen table was already set. As soon as I sat down, Mikey, the smallest of the brothers, immediately began to bombard me with questions. Leave me alone. If my passport hadn't been taken away, I'd be in Carlos' arms by now, not listening to this bullshit. The bespectacled nerd Richie was stupidly ignoring me and looking at his phone. The older among the boys, Bully Stan, looked at me for a long time, and then said mockingly that I was the only one here who looked like a Rain Man. What? I gave him the finger, but accidentally brushed my plate and turned it over. I abruptly jumped out of my seat and pretended that Stan had offended me very much, then quickly went to my room. After closing the door, I immediately called my beloved Carlos. He was just furious and shouted that because of me, he almost got caught by the cops at the border. I begged his forgiveness for 10 minutes. In the end, Carlos relented and gave me one last chance 2 days later. But he also added that if I didn't come there, it was all over between us. My parents came in without knocking, and I barely managed to hide my phone. After them came Bully Stan and Richie the Geek. The brothers immediately began to apologize for their behavior during dinner. I pathetically said that I forgave them, and then I gave them the finger again. Stan grinned approvingly. And then everyone left. But a couple of minutes later, Richie the nerd returned. He was alone. He blurted out that he wasn't really ashamed, and that I wasn't welcome here. I want to run away from here myself to Mexico. Richie thought for a moment and said he was actually willing to help, so he wanted to get rid of me. Seriously? Richie said it was simple. We just needed to think of a way to get his parents out. But this was for little Mikey. He was folks' favorite and knew everything about them. The next morning, I found Mikey in the backyard. He was very happy to see me, but as soon as I told him about my plan with Richie, Mikey burst into tears and said he wouldn't let me go anywhere. Little Mikey, are you in love? I tried to hug him, but he turned away. Mikey, my friend, if you help me, I'll give you a peck on the cheek. He blushed and asked in embarrassment if I was lying. Then I kissed him on the forehead, considerate in advance. Sighing, Mikey said that his parents wanted to go to one concert this weekend, but all the tickets were sold out. He could Photoshop copies of these tickets. Wow. I handed over the fake tickets during lunch. Parents were just in an orgy of enjoyment. Everything seemed to be going well. Only the older bully Stan was silent. He watched me suspiciously from the other end of the table. After lunch, Stan grabbed my arm near the stairs, pulled me close and demanded sternly that I explain what was going on. He was suddenly so close, his thick hair, the smell of men's perfume, his green eyes. My heart began to beat treacherously and I couldn't even say anything. But Stan insisted on an answer. He knew I was up to something. For some reason, I could not confess to him that I had a boyfriend. Instead, I quickly lied that I allegedly had a seriously ill friend in Mexico. Suddenly, Stan felt a surge of emotion. He said that a good friend of his had just died, and that Stan had never had time to visit him before he died. I'll help you, Stan promised. Before his parents left, I had to steal my passport. Richie the nerd told us that the safe was in their parents' office, but he didn't know the code. Then Stan's help came in handy. It turned out that the parents trusted him as the eldest with the code to the safe. In the evening, when everyone was getting ready for bed, I snuck into my parents' office. Just as I hit the first digit of the code, I heard footsteps approaching. One of the fathers was coming here. I started looking for a place to hide when I heard Stan's voice. He deliberately distracted his father. I hurried to the safe and quickly entered the code. The safe opened. Grabbing my passport, I slipped out of the room, right behind my father and Stan. I didn't believe it, but I did it. Carlos, we'll be together soon. In the evening, I gathered all the guys in my room. I had to decide how to get to the border tomorrow. Stan again volunteered to help and said that he would take me without any problems, and he would borrow the car from his friend. I smiled, and little Mikey mimicked Stan. Was Mikey jealous of me? What nonsense. Yes. Stan, of course, was smart, honest, caring, and handsome. Trying to push these thoughts away, I abruptly told the guys that I wanted to sleep. The escape would be tomorrow. We needed to gain strength. Early in the morning, my parents left for a concert. The bus was only an hour away from leaving for Mexico. I was wildly worried. Constantly looking at the clock, Stan was still missing. Finally, we heard a car horn. Stan! We ran to the car. Stan, in his defense, said that his friends changed his mind about giving the car and he had to steal it. Wow. Stan, it's time. If we don't leave in 5 minutes, we'll be late. Richie the nerd said that I was a great girl. Little Mikey put his arm around my neck and whispered that I wasn't going anywhere without my passport. What did he mean? Then Mikey pointed to the trash can. My passport lay in it, torn into small pieces. Mikey, what have you done? They won't let me cross the border now. That's all. Tears welled up in my eyes. Richie the nerd immediately took his phone and said that he found one point where documents were rarely checked. The bus left there in 10 minutes. I immediately jumped into Stan's car and we drove to the bus. I had never driven so fast, but we made it. At the bus stop, Stan hugged me so tightly that I stopped breathing for a second. That's when Carlos called me. Damn it. I turned away and held the phone to my ear. My love, I'm waiting for you. Where are you? Came from the phone. Stan seemed to hear everything. Without answering Carlos, I dropped the call. Stan, see you. But it was clear from his face that he understood. I started to explain, but he interrupted me and told me to go to the bus. Immediately. With mixed feelings, I boarded a bus full of Mexicans. I suddenly realized that very soon I would be in a foreign country with a man I barely knew. What was I doing? The bus moved slowly. I watched through the window as Stan stole a sad look at me, then got into the car and started the engine. Wait! Stop! The driver braked sharply. I ran out the doors. Tears rolled down my face as I ran as fast as I could to Stan's car. He didn't know what was going on, so he stepped out onto the road and I gave him a big hug. Stan, I don't need to go to Mexico. I wanted to stay here with you. Half an hour later, Stan and I returned home, and Richie and Mikey met us at the door. I hugged Richie. Mikey stood off to the side, embarrassed. He was still ashamed because of my passport. I went over to him and patted his head. You know, Mikey, when you grow up, you're going to find love. In the meantime, you're the best little brother in the world to me. We all hugged together. At this moment, the parents came into the house. It turned out that Phil had a stomach ache on the way and they decided to go back. When Phil and Pete saw us hugging, they said it was great that I finally started loving my brothers. That evening after dinner, Richie took me aside and told me that in the internet, from Carlos's phone number, somebody was looking for girls to work as dancers abroad. This Carlos was a real bandit. And I could have been completely screwed. The nanny called me in the morning. She wanted to know how I was doing. Barely restraining my emotions, I replied in a serious tone that everything was fine. But then I could not stand it. Almost squealing with joy, I thanked her. Thank you, Nanny, for changing my life so dramatically. After all, this time, I found not only a home and a family, but also, it seems, true love. My friend Nancy gave me a big hug for good luck. As soon as she came out of the locker room, one of the dancers told me to be careful with Nancy because she liked girls. What did she mean by that? She was seen with a brunette over the weekend. They were hugging, she added pointedly. Come on, I had been friends with Nancy since childhood, and I was not going to let someone spread stupid gossip about her. I wanted to say this, but it was time to go on stage and my ballet partner Ray was late. I stood backstage and dialed his number for the 5th time. Come on, pick up the phone. Our names were announced. Oh no. What should I do? This was the main exam after 4 years of study. I couldn't go on stage alone. But suddenly Nancy came running up to me in a man's ballet costume. What was happening? Nancy said that Ray had pulled his ligaments, but she would perform in his place because Nancy had been to all the rehearsal and knew the dance. She put her arm around me too gently, I thought. And at that moment, for some reason, I remembered the words from the locker room. Nancy likes girls. But that couldn't be true. We went on stage and I tried to give my best, and we did it. The jury was delighted that the role of the partner was played by a girl and offered to perform at the reporting concert. I almost fainted with happiness. After all, they choose dancers for the National Theater. This was my dream. Maybe I could even become a world star. The concert was only 5 days away, but I was sure that we would have time to prepare. In the locker room, Nancy hugged me again and offered to walk me home, because it was already dark outside. It was strange. I hesitated a little but still agreed. All the way we walked in silence for some reason, but when we reached my house, Nancy suddenly took my hand and said she had an important question. She hesitated for a moment as if embarrassed, and then timidly asked if I would agree to live with her. God, did my best friend just ask me out? I refused to believe it. I was confused and muttered that I would give an answer after our performance. After all, A sharp refusal could hurt her. Nancy said she'd wait as long as she had to. Then she reached out to give me her usual kiss on the cheek. But I pulled away and quickly went into the house. I couldn't sleep a wink all night. Maybe I just misunderstood something. She couldn't possibly like girls. We used to talk about cute guys at school. Over and over again, I replayed various memories in my head. I used to spend all my time at Nancy's, and we could spend hours doing each other's hair. We were so close that everyone thought we were sisters. Maybe Nancy was just lonely after her parents got divorced because of the rehearsals. We spent less time together. I decided to fix it and have a real girl's day, just like before. I picked up Nancy in the morning to take her to the beauty parlor. She was delighted and said that she would be happy to spend the day together. In the parlor, Nancy immediately offered to go for a couples massage. Looked like she was really hitting on me. I wasn't ready for this. To get out of it, I told her I wanted to go to the spa first, and Nancy could do some gorgeous curls for now. Nancy was surprised, but went to the barber's chair. Meanwhile, I put my feet in the fish bath and looked at the jewelry stand. What a cool emerald hairpin! Nancy's voice brought me back to reality. I couldn't believe my eyes. Instead of curling her hair, she got it to look like a boy. What? But Nancy was very pleased. She said that now she would be even better to embody the role of my partner. In the dance, she added hastily. Did she want to look like a guy to please me? No, it was stupid. I lied about needing to get home and left. On the way, I got a text from my friend Mike. He invited me to a pool party. I was about to say that I wasn't up to it, but here was an idea. There would probably be a bunch of guys out there with their pumped up torsos. Maybe Nancy would like someone. Maybe Mike. Girls stick to him. I called Nancy and invited her to the party, but she said she had other plans. I blurted out that everyone would be wearing swimsuits. Even you? She asked suddenly. Yeah. Nancy immediately agreed. Did she want to see me in a bikini? But she had seen me on the beach 100 times. What if her infatuation with girls started recently? Then it could still be fixed. As soon as we arrived, I introduced Nancy to Mike. I told her what a great guy he was and that he once protected me from some assholes who wanted to take my phone. But today, the conversation with Mike didn't go well. For some reason, he was embarrassed and didn't pay any attention to Nancy. But then I noticed that Mike was standing on the edge of the pool, and I thought of something. Now you will have to communicate. I sort of accidentally bumped Nancy, and she and Mike went flying into the water. The guests screamed, and for some reason, Nancy pretended to be drowning. It was so ridiculous. And while Mike was splashing awkwardly, a girl by the pool helped Nancy out. Soon they were chatting pleasantly on the deck chairs. Nancy even hugged her new friend. I couldn't believe my eyes. Apparently, Nancy really liked girls. And this was serious. Confused, I drove home. Has Nancy been friends with me all these years because she really liked me? I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it for so many years. I got upset. I didn't want to see Nancy at all. But I was only one day away from the show. I had no choice. So the next morning, I packed up and went to rehearsal. During rehearsal, I almost cringed every time Nancy touched me. I was so fixated on it that I lost my balance during the next carry, and we both fell to the floor. In the locker room, Nancy said she understood that I was worried about the concert. Then she added that she wanted to cheer me up. She pulled out an emerald hairpin, the same I looked at then in the beauty parlor. It turned out that Nancy noticed this, and I wondered how many guys were so attentive to me. I had a crazy thought in my head. What if we really would make a couple? After all, many relationships start with friendship. That evening, I decided to take Nancy for a walk in the park as an experiment, and she immediately agreed. God, what am I doing? Nancy glowed with happiness. She brought my favorite cookie. It was very nice, but I still couldn't relax. Then Nancy asked me if I thought about it. I hesitated, but then someone ran up to us. Mike. I hadn't seen him since the party, and I certainly hadn't expected to see him here. He was excited and said he had lost his puppy. We immediately agreed to help with the search. We decided to split up, but Mike asked me to go with him because he was in the park for the first time. Nancy went the other way, and after 15 minutes, she sent a message that she urgently needed to go home. She must have been annoyed that Mike had ruined her date. I didn't know what to do. Mike noticed this and tried to cheer me up in every possible way, asking me a lot about ballet. He said that he had been to my performance once and he liked it very much. And then he added that he understood how exhausting rehearsals could be, because he himself was engaged in swimming. I didn't think he understood me so well. We went all over the park, but the puppy was nowhere to be found. It was just an excuse to be alone with me. Because before that, we only saw each other at parties. But after that meeting at the pool, he realized that he wanted to communicate with me more closely. What the hell? But I liked Mike's attention. Embarrassed, Mike asked me on a date tomorrow, after the concert. I was confused and blurted out that we should talk after the performance. But God, that's when I had to give Nancy an answer. I just didn't know what to do, as if I was caught in the middle. Nancy was always easy for me, but Mike was so confident and determined. I was totally confused. I lied to Mike that I'd remembered something important and rushed home. I couldn't sleep all night. Did I have to choose between Nancy and Mike? Because of these thoughts, even the performance took backseat. But when I went to the locker room in the morning, Nancy wasn't there. Looked like she was really offended. She did answer the phone. Did I have a partner again? Our names were announced. It was definitely a failure. Suddenly Nancy came running up to me, out of breath. She apologized for being late and we rushed to the stage. Despite the fact that I was preparing for the worst, on stage, we were like one. I couldn't believe until the last moment we had succeeded. We were already bowing when suddenly the jury offered me a role in the production. I'd been dreaming about this for years, but now I didn't feel happy. As soon as we went backstage, Nancy congratulated me on the role and then asked if I had thought about her offer. I thought, Nancy, I want to say that I didn't have time to finish. Someone called me. It was Mike with a bunch of flowers, and he was coming here. It was time to decide. To be honest, after yesterday's walk, I realized that I really liked Mike. I'd like to date him a lot more than Nancy. In tears, I told her we couldn't be a couple. Nancy wondered what I was talking about, that you're in love with me, and I can't reciprocate. But Nancy suddenly laughed. Through her laughter, she said that I had misunderstood something. What about a short haircut? And the girl by the pool? Nancy explained that she had always wondered if a short haircut would suit her. And that girl helped her out of the pool, and that she was actually drowning. And it was strange that I didn't notice it. So Nancy wasn't faking it then? Wait, why did we have to live together? And who was the brunette you were hugging? Nancy couldn't stop laughing. She looked out the door and called out to someone. A guy with long dark hair came up to us. That's my brunette, Nancy said, and added that he was often mistaken for a girl. Then Nancy explained everything. She and her boyfriend recently started dating and even rented an apartment, but they urgently needed to find a neighbor in the second room, so she thought I might move in with them. I wanted to sink into the ground with shame. How could have I imagined such a thing? Mike decided to change the subject and said that he also wanted me to meet someone. He bought a puppy yesterday, and now we could walk in the park every day. I agree, but only if we walk in pairs.